Just a quick overview in terms of the agenda. We're going to give you a poll of 6 questions, easy questions, yes, no, don't know, to get a sense of our audience today, our participants, and the institutions from which you're representing, and to also see kind of where you are in terms of credit for prior learning. We'll do another quick overview of what's going on in the world of credit for prior learning in terms of definitions, trends, and research, and then move to our 3 panelists to introduce them. The bulk of the time today is going to be spent after they provide their institutional overviews on a panel discussion with several questions looking at, as I mentioned before, kind of key issues and challenges, and we'll be able to build on today's webinar and looking more at implementation, data, and future directions in next week's webinar. So let's, and again, more time for questions during that panel discussion. We will take your questions then, and whatever we don't get to today, we will certainly respond to you via email or through the document that we provide with the link to the recorded webinar. So let's get to the polling questions now. You're going to see those on the right side of your screen. There are about 6 of them. They're going to pop up pretty soon. And again, you've got yes, no, I don't know. And as you're answering them, I'm going to read them out to you, and I really encourage you all to answer those so we have a sense of who's in the audience. And we will share the returns or the results of this quick poll with you, not only during this webinar, but also in the follow-up materials we send. So we want to get a sense of your individual understanding of credit for prior learning and prior learning assessment, and what your understanding of what your college policies and practices are as well. You've got about 90 seconds to answer these questions. We want to see how your institution supports prior learning assessment programs, if you feel that they do, through the mission and the strategic goals. Question number 4 is about administrators, staff, and faculty and how they understand and support credit for prior learning. The 5th question is about your institution having clear policies and practices on credit for prior learning. Do you think that's the case? Yes, no, don't know. And then the final question is, I know what peer institutions and colleagues are doing with credit for prior learning. So let's see. I think you've got, I think we've finished up. I think this is all the time that you have for the questions. So let's see if we have any results, if people were able to answer all of the questions. We'll wait a couple of seconds and see, and then we'll move on to, if we're not able to share today, then we'll move on and share that later with you in the follow-up. Okay, so let's move on to definitions, trends, and research. And just a quick overview there before we move to institutional questions. So one of the things that we wanted to start out talking about today was just all the different names the field has used to include and indicate a range of options: prior learning assessment, experiential learning, extra-institutional learning. And credit for prior learning is the term we're going to use today, and we're going to use the definition we have used in our new publication, Credit for Prior Learning, Charting Institutional Practice for Sustainability, and that's a resource we'll share with you as well. Credit for Prior Learning, or CPL, is academic credit granted for demonstrated college-level equivalencies gained through learning experiences outside the college classroom. And CPL uses one of the well-established methods for assessing that learning, generally under 4 accepted approaches: standardized exams, third-party evaluations, individualized assessments such as portfolio, and institution-led exams or assessments. Some of the trends that we're seeing are new venues for credit for prior learning. So along with traditional forms like credit for military training or workplace training or industry certifications, we're seeing new sources continue to emerge from online education vendors, MOOCs, open educational resources, just to mention a few. And with this attention to post-secondary access, affordability, and attainment that we're seeing throughout the country, you see this reflected in the slide here with the Gallup Lumina poll on the screen, with a majority of Americans agreeing that students should be able to receive college credit for knowledge and skills acquired outside the classroom, and also reporting that they would be more likely to enroll in higher education if they could receive credit for what they already know. And probably many of you know that there is some really great research that's emerging from organizations such as Council for Adult and Experiential Learning, or CAEL, and College Board. And it really speaks to students getting motivated to return to school, to persist, complete. They're doing well. They're showing high GPAs. They're saving time. They're saving money. And along with that good news about student outcomes, there are, of course, some challenges, which a 2012 ACE survey of institutions, students, and employers captures with some findings about information sharing gaps among stakeholders. So there's still, even though there's a lot of activity going on with credit for prior learning, a lot of initiatives, some really good things going on in individual states and across systems and in multi-state collaboratives and through foundations like Lumina, there's still a good deal of learner confusion about options, processes, and points of contact. Students ask, what are my options? How do I start? Where do I go if I encounter problems? And so what we find on still quite a few campuses, that with that lack of awareness, there continues to be low demand from students. And then there's the perception subsequently from the college that there's not much need for it. So with that in mind, the promise and the challenge that we have with credit for prior learning, let's move to introductions of today's panelists and then get overviews from them as well. So Marcus Kolb is Assistant Vice President for Assessment and Academic Policy at Ivy Tech Community College in Indiana. Marcus plans and manages assessment strategies for student learning and creates and interprets academic policy for the Ivy Tech system of 23 campuses. Prior to his current position, he served as a strategy officer at Lumina Foundation, focusing on student learning outcomes and quality in higher education, providing leadership for the development and testing of the Foundation's degree qualifications profile. Tiffany Melvin is the college-wide director of prior learning assessment at Miami-Dade College. And in this role, Tiffany provides leadership and administrative oversight of the processes and procedures by which students are awarded college credit for prior learning. And Tiffany is also responsible for the college-wide assessment of those adult learners to increase retention and completion for this particular population. Nan Travers is the director of college-wide academic review at SUNY Empire State College, and she focuses on the policies and practices of adult learning, prior learning assessment, open educational resources, and e-portfolios. Nan has conducted extensive research, and she's widely published nationally and internationally, and currently Nan is the project manager for the Lumina grant that created the Global Learning Qualifications Network. So I'm going to turn this over to Marcus to begin with our institutional overviews of Ivy Tech Community College. Marcus?
Good afternoon, you all. Thanks a lot for the introduction, Mary Beth, and for the opportunity to participate today. It's an honor to be talking with you all. A couple of words about Ivy Tech. It is the only community college in Indiana, so it really serves every student that might identify themselves as somebody who fits into that community college mold. It's a comprehensive community college in the sense that we're serving a technical and career function. We're obviously serving a community support function, but we're also serving a transfer function for the four-year institutions. So all of the services you can sort of envision happening at the community college level are encompassed in Ivy Tech. It's really only been a system for about a decade. So part of the theme of what I'll talk about today, and in fact next week, is some of the growing pains that come along with taking a bunch of disparate campuses and sort of stitching them together into a system. When I talk about it with folks, often the best way I can suggest for them to visualize it is as a franchise model, right? So we're all McDonald's, we're all delivering curriculum, the same curriculum to a set of folks or the same product, but you know, when you move from McDonald's to McDonald's, all the Big Macs have cheese and meat and 3 buns and lettuce, but how much special sauce and whether they use those little reconstituted onions or real onions, those kinds of things can really vary from campus to campus, and each campus has its own way of going about certain things, so it creates a certain amount of challenge. As far as credit for prior learning goes, we really think about it kind of in 3 ways. The first of those is what we call our crosswalks, which is really ways that we take prior experience that can be well described, and that might be experience with military service, could be experience in certifications that students have already attained, could be service experience in areas of tests, testing for learning. There's also the traditional testing approach like CLEP. And then finally, we do some portfolio assessment at Ivy Tech, although that's an area that we have some work to do in. So that sort of summarizes where we're at. We have a real interest in what's going to be talked about here today as learners, and then we also hope that we can make a contribution to the conversation. So with that, I think we're going to speak with Tiffany.
Thank you, Marcus, and good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for participating and joining us today for this webinar. MiamiDade College was created with the idea that anyone with a desire to get a college degree should be given that opportunity and the opportunity to really change their lives through education. So we have over 160,000 students attending MDC across 7 campuses, 3 centers, and several extension centers across South Florida. We do have a wide range of programs at the certificate, associate, and baccalaureate level. We also serve approximately 3,500 veterans. The majority of our student body is Hispanic or Latino, and we do have nearly 40% of our students that are 26 and older. So that's a key student population that we want to target in addition to our military and veteran students. The majority of our students do transfer to a university to continue their education. And we offer several CPL methods. We do have the credit by exam, the standardized exams such as APIB, CLEP, DSST, Excelsior, UExcel. And we also have our institutional challenge exams. We do evaluate military training and experience for credit, as well as evaluating local non-collegiate training and workplace training for college credit, including industry certifications and licensure, and we also have portfolio-based assessment as well. So we are interested in also learning from participants in the webinar, really exploring CPL further, both today and next week's webinar. And now I will turn it over to Nan.
Thank you so much, and again, thanks to everybody for joining us. The SUNY Empire State College is part of the SUNY System, which is I think it's the largest state system in the United States with 64 institutions, so we are one of the 64. Within that, we're the largest liberal arts college. Our institution began in 1971 specifically for the adult learner, and so a lot of the way in which we approach education is from the perspective of how to best reach adult learners. We offer associate, bachelor's, and master's degrees. We have a lot of transfer students with partial credits coming, partial credits partially to a degree, and also lots of prior learning assessment, as well as that we have students who move along the different degrees that we offer. We have 35 locations across the state of New York, and that's about 60% of our enrollment, while the remaining 40% is online, international, and then we have some special programs for apprenticeship and nursing. That comes out to about 20,000 students. About 90% of that is undergraduate, and about 10% are the military veteran students. Our average age is 34, so we do have an older student population. One of the unique things about SUNY Empire State College is that all of our undergraduate students design their own degree plans. We have different areas of study that have developed guidelines that are very much like competency-based statements. And students use those, they use their prior learning to bring into their degrees, and then can shape that degree around the prior learning, or just use the prior learning to fill in the different kinds of requirements that a degree has to have. So the credit for prior learning has been a critical place in our institution since it was opened, and continues to be really the center point of our institution.
Thank you, Nan. And we've had our first question pop up, so before we get into our panel discussion, let me refer it to you, and then if others want to jump in and answer, they can as well. One of our participants wants to know where one can find out about evaluating portfolios.
So at our institution, we actually have a whole section on our website that you can reach. I realize that our slide does not have our website on that, but that is www.esc.edu. And if you go for prior learning assessment, there's a whole lot of information there about the portfolio process.
Marcus or Tiffany, would you like to add to that about resources?
Yes.
Yeah, I'm sorry. Go ahead, Tiffany.
Sorry. Yes, we also have a PLA website, which is mdc.edu/PLA, and we have a portfolio section and a request for information to find out more about portfolios and evaluating portfolios.
And Marcus?
I don't have a whole lot to add other than to say, you know, any decent assessment website, so I think about the National Institute for Learning Outcomes Assessment, NILOA, N-I-L-O-A. With their focus on assessment, portfolios are always part of that conversation. And while they may not put it in the context of prior learning, they're absolutely going to have good resources for you in terms of what you should be looking for in a portfolio, what constitutes a portfolio, et cetera.
I think that's a great resource to make everyone aware of, and I'll just remind participants that all the references we mentioned today will be included in our follow-up email. So thanks for that question. So we will move on to our next set of questions. Thank you very much for the institutional overviews, and we'll start here. And again, webinar participants, just keep those questions coming, and we'll get as many of your questions in and answer them as we can. But one of the things we wanted to start out with was to find out from each institution why you put credit for prior learning in place, and what were considerations regarding specific CPL options.
At Ivy Tech, you know, as with my counterparts here on the phone, the diversity of the student body is significant, and so many of them are coming with what, you know, we could loosely call life experience, right? So we do have a significant population of students who are straight out of high school, but we also have a significant population of students who have been in the workforce for a few years, returning adults, folks that have served in the military, et cetera. So part of the question really around what we can do or why we should be doing it is how can we best get these folks to a credential in an expedient and a cost-effective manner. So, you know, you have to cast about for opportunities to sort of shorten the time that they must stay with us in order to allow them to finish. Because particularly at the community college, they are really thinking by and large about what comes next. It's not about the couple of years that's in front of them. It's about what's going to be at the end of that time, either in the workforce or in the transfer path. So the less time they spend with us, the quicker they can get to those goals. So in casting about for ways that we can support that, prior learning makes a lot of sense for us because it helps the student manage their cost, speeds their time to completion, and really positions them well to be able to take fullest advantage of the curriculum, and that we're not miring them in a bunch of prerequisites that they can avoid by doing some of this credit prior learning work. So for Ivy Tech, it's really about recognizing that we have a wide swath of students that we serve. Some of them are going to come with stuff already in their back pocket, not things that we recognize readily at the institution, but stuff in terms of background and experience that we really owe it to them to account for, because it allows them to move through more, at a more reasonable cost and at a speedier rate. Nan?
So with Empire State College, I would say that I would ditto everything that Marcus has said, but what I would like to add is that right from the beginning, prior learning assessment has been extremely important at our institution. So it is part of our philosophy, which comes from a social justice perspective, that prior learning assessment gives greater access to education. Without it, some individuals, it would be, because of the cost and the time, there are barriers to pursuing higher education. Well, prior learning assessment actually opens up the door for many students to have the kinds of learning that they have acquired, that's verifiable college-level learning, to be used within a degree. So that was a very important piece of our philosophy as an institution. Tiffany?
And both of my colleagues made such great points, and I agree with that and share the same reasoning that we really strive to offer accessible, affordable, high-quality education to meet the needs of our diverse student population. And part of our mission is to promote successful lifelong learning. And CPL, Credit for Prior Learning, really does accept and validate, support, and promote successful lifelong learning. It also supports persistence, retention, and completion efforts here at MDC, throughout the state of Florida, and on a national level, as you all are familiar. So we really have the ability to attract, retain, and graduate more adult students with the ability to earn credit for prior learning. And really training our adult population.
Thank you, Tiffany. And there have been a lot of really great follow-up questions, and I think some are kind of connected to what you were speaking to earlier about mission and meeting the needs of the population. There's one in particular, and maybe it's not just for registrars, but it could be for other populations as well, and it kind of flows nicely into the next question as well. But one of our participants wants to know if, in working and putting these policies together, if you have any suggestions on how to deal with registrars who seem adverse to credit for prior learning. So you could substitute your own stakeholder group if you wanted to. This is specifically about registrars.
That's, that I'm going to talk in a few moments about the issue of stakeholders in this and how important it is to sort of win their support early. Here's the brass tacks of the thing, and this might be unpopular with certain populations, but I know we wrestle with it all the time and have to articulate it out loud, quite frankly, which is if we are going to claim ourselves as a student-centered institution, then the administrative challenges that come along with some of these things, the early question about portfolios, for example, portfolios can be very cumbersome to manage, time-consuming, a lot of folks that need to lay their hands on. You got to come up with a way to account for it in the student information system. However, we could spend a lot of time sitting around the table saying, well, this is hard, so I don't know. But if we call ourselves student-centered, and we strive to be that, then this is really about serving students the best that we can. And we have to put aside some of the administrative challenges that come along with that, and I'm assuming that's where a registrar is coming from. Hope that's not a bad assumption. We have to put aside those barriers that administration creates for us and sort of step into the fray. As an aside, there are many folks doing this, not just my colleagues on the phone here. And so a phone call to the institution down the street or the sister institution across the country, or even a colleague who's a registrar elsewhere, to say, how are you guys managing this, might be a way to take a little bit of the sting off it for the folks that are maybe resistant up front?
I would say that I agree with Marcus. And we have looked into some of the resistance from the registrar point of view and really discovered that the resistance was more because the student information system really was not set up in a way that made the ability to record the credits easily. We're doing some work around that in order to make that work better. And, you know, so that was one of the challenges that we've been up against. But at the same time, we did exactly what Marcus was suggesting. We reached out to some of the other institutions and got their registrars and our registrar and some of the technology people together in a meeting so that we could learn more about how they handled it. We're actually now helping each other out in different ways. So it's a nice way to create a partnership as well.
Tiffany, anything to add there?
They both said it so eloquently, but I would just add on the kind of looking at their colleagues at other institutions, as previously mentioned, in terms of, because I think it could be more from a policy practice perspective. How do we accept this? How do we transcribe this and get it on the record? So establishing a policy and seeing what other colleagues are doing, and also referring to the research and resources that are available, such as AACRO, AACRO, which is the Association of Admissions and College Registrar Officials. I know that they have some resources on CPL and sort of some of the issues that would be related to that staff, but my other two colleagues I agree with and concur.
Thanks. And one more question before we go to the next subject area. As you were talking about your college and the way it was set up and sort of the different options that were available, I think there were several participants who wondered about, you know, how you set those up, what your considerations were. So, for example, you know, using a competency-based approach with a student or with students that create their own degree programs, or looking at a course match and having to match each objective. And how did you go in the direction that you went, and how do you deal with the challenges with that whatever approach you've taken?
This is Nan, and I'll start on that question. Because we have the individualized design of the degree, it gives us great flexibility in terms of not doing a course match, but looking at the learning for what the learning is. We accept every form of credit for prior learning at our institution, but our portfolio process is quite extensive. So we have different kinds of kind of general guidelines in terms of how to think about it being college-level learning. But recently, we acquired a Lumina grant. It was a 2-year grant that we have just closed, but out of it came the Global Learning Qualification Framework. That is also accessible on our website, and we will send out information and the resources that are going to be coming out after the webinar. That has been designed as a competency-based framework for being able to assess any learning from any source to see if, to really evaluate it for being college level. There are two sides to the framework. One is for the students to use, and so we've been developing, there's key questions, and we've been developing templates for students to use in their portfolios that help make sure that they are touching the areas that need to be addressed to assure that this is college level. And then we have a template for the evaluators, again, using those competency statements in order to assess the learning. This is still in early stages. We've had a series of pilots running. We're on our second phase of pilots, And what we're finding already is that we have a much better handle on the students' learning by using the framework.
Great, thank you. And before we move on to the next question, I've got a comment from an assistant registrar that I wanted to read. It kind of flows back to the question about registrars. I have worked in the capacity of an assistant registrar for years. I've always supported CPL and believe it is a great opportunity as long as the learning is verifiable and aligns with the learning outcomes and objectives of the course. So we salute you for that, and we're glad to see that comment. So I'm going to move on to the next question, and I think it's going to tie into a lot of the questions that participants are now asking through Q&A. What has been a key challenge in setting up and expanding your CPL options?
So this is Nan again, and I'm going to start on this question. One of the key challenges that we have had is because we're so distributed with the 35 locations plus online learning, that really looking at the consistency of the ways in which students approached the portfolio process and the evaluation of that. Just to give you a sense of the size of our individualized portfolio assessment program, we have between 4,000 and 5,000 students working on portfolios at any one time across all those locations. And all of the faculty are expected to advise the students in the process. So it's very distributed nature. And what we were really challenged with was a way of developing good information for students and good information for the faculty and the evaluators. So we have been really working with web development in terms of trying to get consistent information and helping the faculty and the evaluators come, approach advising students and evaluating the learning in a very similar way. We have over 1,000 evaluators, and so when you have that large of a number, it's very important to have these kinds of resources. Tiffany?
And that is so true. I share the same challenge with Nan, though our portfolio option is not on a grand scale, but we still are working with various campuses and locations, so creating that systematic process to get the information to both students, faculty, and staff. I share in that, and we provide training, and I'll talk more about that in part 2 of the webinar. But for us, a key challenge has really been awareness of CPL in general, because most everyone, for example, is familiar with CLAP exams, but may be unaware that it is a CPL option. So really creating the association of CPL and then the various options to receive credit for prior learning. But also that CPL is a valid, rigorous form of assessment. And this really speaks to the academic side and the faculty, because that's a key concern that comes for them, that we are ensure we're not giving away credits, that students are earning this in whatever method they choose, be it a credit by exam. It's all faculty and academic driven, and so really spreading that message. And that really came about as I was, we're working on developing the portfolio option. So really, to kind of address some of that, we established a college-wide PLA Academic Faculty Advisory Committee and a Student Services Advisory Committee. And it's really through the work of these committees that the portfolio option was developed, but also helps to build awareness college-wide. And to assist students for the portfolio, we have a portfolio workshop and a portfolio development course. So that's very helpful in terms of promoting awareness and really expanding that particular CPL option. Marcus?
probably the chief challenge that we deal with at Ivy Tech is related to what Tiffany was just talking about, and it's the awareness question, but I'll take it in a little bit of a different direction. There is common acknowledgement among our faculty and administrators that prior learning assessment or credit for prior learning is a worthwhile endeavor. But in a place where resources are so constrained, to make a significant investment to ramp up what it is that we already do feels a little scary for folks because they don't really know what's on the other side. So in other words, if we rapidly grow a credit for prior learning system beyond what we currently have and then nobody shows up, you know, that would obviously be perceived as a waste of resources. At the same time, if you don't have a robust system in place where folks can come to it and achieve the credit for prior learning that they deserve, then there's really no way to know about demand. So we sort of have a chicken and the egg environment at the college in that I think folks understand we could do better than what we're currently doing, but because resources are tight, there's a reluctance to really spend a lot of dollars to ramp up what we're doing. But in order to answer the question of, well, how many people would really use a credit for prior learning process, you got to have a process in place. So, again, the chicken and the egg conundrum is we can't really show clearly the demand without having the system, and we can't build the system without demonstrating some sense of demand. And with that, we find our hands cuffed a little bit in terms of getting where we want to go with credit for prior learning. So this really is then about, you know, gathering what you can anecdotally. I'll talk, I think, next week a little bit about how we've done some data gathering around this to sort of figure out what demand might be, but it still takes the courage from leadership to kind of make that initial substantial investment to take us from where we are, which is competent but not excellent, up to a level that we really think would serve everybody.
Thanks, Marcus. We've got several really good questions about that refer to your awareness, but then also your awareness point, but also back to the ACE survey about this information sharing pipeline, and that is, where does the process start? How does it start for students? Is there a system in place so that that all are reviewed as they apply? How does that work at your institution?
Well, at Ivy Tech, we are in the process of putting that front and center. So I've been pushing us hard to move that into the application. And you know, I'll use the word diagnostic because for me, that's where a lot of this lands. We need a place where we can diagnose students in the sense that we can quickly ascertain whether or not they might be a good candidate for being involved in credit for prior learning in some way, right? So you need a quick and dirty set of questions that all students have to wrangle with that ask questions about experience, about service in the military, about certifications they may already possess. In the case of simply transfer credit, are they transfer students? And you need to put those in a place where they answer them immediately upon arrival so that you can act quickly on what they say and you're not waiting until they get a few semesters in and, oh, by the way, you wouldn't have had to take that course if we'd have known this kind of scenario, right? So that's an area that we need to improve on. The state of the state for us, frankly, is kind of catch as catch can. So you have some advisors that push it, but I'm quite certain they all don't. You have some faculty who see it happen in front of them in their classes and ask some good questions, but I'm quite certain that all don't. We have our college success course, which seems like a logical place for it to live. So there we have some faculty that are talking about it, but not all are. So I've sort of landed on the idea that if we can get at the diagnostic issue in an efficient way, in a timely way, then that will really raise the demand, and that will allow us to do some more things. But that's really, for me, what it hinges on. We got to ask immediately of everyone, where might you fit on the CPL sort of continuum as a good candidate?
Thanks. You know, there are a lot of challenges that folks are raising in the Q&A box, so I'm going to hit a couple of others before we move on, and any or all of you can feel free to respond. Another issue that folks have brought up is residency requirements. Has that been something that's been in the way, or you've had to work around, or how does CPL and residency work together?
For
Go ahead.
us, we work around that because the residency requirement comes from our regional accreditor. Students have to do 25% of their degree program through direct instruction. However, then, that does leave up to 75% of a degree program that could be utilized via various CPL options or a combination thereof.
Dan, go ahead.
Yeah, and mine is almost very similar to Tiffany in that the prior learning assessment is coming in as advanced standing credit, not as institutional credit. For our associate's degree, we have a residency requirement of 20 credits. For our bachelor's, it is 31 credits. So that still leaves a large proportion of the degree that students can use prior learning assessment in. So we do have students who take advantage of that and may bring in as much as 40 credits into their degree with prior learning at an associate's level and something like a 94 credits at the bachelor's level. That's a lot of credits.
And one more question that the group participant seems to be asking about, and that is transfer. So what challenges are you seeing? You've got this great policy practice put into place. What's happening as far as being able to transfer to another institution within the system or 2-year to 4-year?
I'll speak to that also because we have a great deal of number of students who both are transferring in and out. We're probably the choice for transfer. When I have talked to SUNY System and I've asked them directly what are the issues that you're seeing in transfer, and do our students have complaints about the transfer of our credits but also our prior learning assessment. And actually, we have the lowest number of complaints out of the entire system. So there's students who are having more difficulty transferring regular classroom credits than they are the prior learning assessment credits, which I find, really surprising. I would have expected it the other way. And I think in many ways it's because the documentation that will come with the different forms of prior learning assessment have really addressed those concerns. So when, we're talking about a CLEP exam or we're talking about, different forms of external prior learning assessment, those all have good documentation. And then our own portfolio process, we also have very strong documentation, so if any institution wants to see that. So I think in some ways it's more transparent, and people can, as long as that receiving institution is actually aware of and is doing prior learning assessment, we have no problems with transfer.
This is really why it's important to be doing the kind of event that ACE is doing here today, because what we're doing is implicitly acknowledging that this is not really an intra-institutional issue, but an inter-institutional issue. So while we can all do very well at our individual institutions with credit for prior learning, recognizing the mobility of our students is only increasing, to build a system that ignores the fact that they're going to pick that learning up and move it somewhere else in a semester, in a year, in a decade, is sort of selling ourselves short, and it's certainly selling students short. So it's not just good enough for us to be resolving this within our own walls, but we do need to be talking with the institutions where the students are headed next so that that movement of the CPL credit can be as seamless as possible for them.
Thanks, Marcus. I'm going to move on to the next question, and I think we're going to, with this, get into a lot of description that relates to some of the questions that continue to be asked. What's a major lesson you've learned that you'd like to share with other institutions? And I think Tiffany's starting off with that one.
Yes, I am. So really it's imperative to have institutional commitment and support for CPL from senior leadership. We're very fortunate to have the direction and support of our college president, provost, and vice provost, and it is with this level of commitment that we are able to build capacity with institutionalized efforts, resources, and structure, including a dedicated full-time director position, my position, a centralized office that supports all campuses and centers, and also really creating a CPL umbrella, if you will, centralized to be able to provide that transparency for students that includes a point of contact as well as dedicated integrated services to be successful.
I'll take what Tiffany said a step further. I agree, particularly around that administrative leadership support. This is really, in some ways, about will building at the campus level. Because you have so many folks out there whose fingers have to be in the CPL conversation in order for it to be successful. We've already talked a little bit about registrars. Certainly we've mentioned faculty. There are the folks out there that have to sell CPL to the students, advisors, and others like that. All these folks have a role to play, so there is a lot of work to be done around the issue of will building, almost political work, in that all of those groups really are going to have their own hesitations, maybe some resistance. And so spending some time helping them work through what their concerns are, helping them work out what the details are that will smooth their part of the process and make it manageable is really time well invested. I find that's what I'm doing at this point, as I mentioned before, as we try and sort of build some capital towards expanding what it is that we're already doing. I got to win the hearts and minds of our faculty, because obviously as the arbiters of academic quality, they're the folks that are going to say, yeah, we can engage in this process fully because we believe that it results in a good reflection of student learning. And then sit with the registrar and say, now tell me what the challenges are going to be for you in the SIS system here, and the coding problems and all those things, and what resources do you need to resolve that? And so that will building really, before you even spend a dollar or begin to advertise or begin to run students through or ramp up your process and start some other stuff to enhance what you're already doing, that will building is so important to get everybody on the same page to make sure that your processes are effective and that your resources are well spent. Nan?
So I would say that I totally agree with both Angel and Marcus, and especially that will building piece. So we've kind of taken that from a perspective of professional development at all levels across the institution, and that even meant that we worked with our IT folks, because just getting our systems to work meant that they had to really understand what this was about and have built value into it so that they cared that the systems actually worked. It wasn't just another task for them. But specifically, we have worked a lot around faculty engagement and training. So one of the things that our institution has put into place is all new faculty go through a year-long orientation. We call it we call our faculty mentors, so it's called New Mentor Orientation. And in that, because we also have the individualized degree, the faculty are really understanding how to work with students. And as they start to work with students, they bring those cases back to the orientation that meets at a regular online meetings and some face-to-face. So we have a way to really work with faculty on the prior learning assessment. And then we also have been doing some ongoing workshops with the faculty. So even if the faculty have been with us and have been engaging in prior learning assessment for a long time, we still feel that it's a need to work in a professional development way. This especially is true around the advising of it and the assessment of it. So we've developed some some professional development opportunities where we pair up seasoned faculty with new faculty and really get them talking about case studies and how do you work with that. And we find that that really helps the seasoned faculty really engage more and the new faculty. We also did even more work around the needs of assessors and really looking at that whole evaluation process. From that, we have developed an evaluator website so that it really addresses all of the aspects of the aspects of what it means to assess learning and the kinds of resources that evaluators need. That we've made public and is also available at our website.
So this is a great segue to some of the questions that are coming in about faculty engagement. And there's one particular question I'm going to find again, and it's really talking about buy-off. A participant is describing having a list of challenge courses, and that the challenge list has gone from 20 plus down to maybe 8 classes due to faculty revisions. No one seems to want to have procedures put in place that might ask them to do more work. So I think, you know, there's a specific question, but it speaks more generally to faculty being engaged and being recognized and incentivized for doing this kind of work. What are just, before we move on to the next question, some lessons learned there that you could share?
You know, the faculty piece of it for me really begins with the idea of well-articulated student learning outcomes for a given course. So on some level you say, well, those should already exist, and you know, faculty, the need for additional faculty work in that area may not be significant. However, you know, when you take a look at a syllabus and you start to look at the learning outcomes and you notice the lack of action verbs or, you know, sort of the nebulous nature of a word like understand, you say, well, boy, maybe we need to work a little bit on these learning outcomes. But for me, that's where it has to begin, is those learning outcomes are really the things that you're going to bounce that student's prior learning against to see whether or not they are eligible to receive credit for that particular chunk of learning. And so I've always sort of thought of it as a backdoor way to get into the student learning outcomes conversation. It's one of the things I really like about credit for prior learning is you still have to track it back to learning outcomes and the articulation of those. So, you know, saying to faculty, look, the work is largely done if you've already articulated your outcomes well, I don't think is inaccurate, and also invites them to think closely about the learning outcomes. But any level of success I think that's going to be had really begins, you know, with those learning outcome statements.
Well, there's one other. No, go ahead, please.
Sure, and I was just going to add that, you know, in a situation, as in this particular case, where you're seeing opportunities disappear for students, you know, there could be some, you know, lack of understanding on the faculty or some fear. And so one of the things that I've really learned is that you need to get the faculty to talk about it, allow them to express the concerns that they have, and really listen to that, because sometimes they just don't have the information. They may not really understand either how to do it, as Marcus has talked about, or they may not really understand what prior learning assessment is about, what the different kinds of options are. And so, and a typical one that I hear with faculty a lot, and not just at my institution, but when I talk to other institutions, is the fear of losing students in their courses, and so it's a decrease in their workload. And actually, the research from the CALE study that came out, Fueling the Race, there is evidence that students, actually those that participate in some form of prior learning assessment, take more courses at that institution. So there's things like that where you can help faculty really understand the full picture that helps them re-engage.
Yeah, and if I could expand on that for just a moment, you know, we've got to be careful that we don't identify all faculty as intractable around this issue. In fact, there are likely champions among your faculty, and those are such crucial allies in these conversations. You've got to find your faculty that understand what it is that we're working towards here, that believe in it, and that are willing to talk about that. Because, it's one thing for me as administrator to walk in a room and say, we got to do this credit for prior learning stuff better, faculty, and here's how, and here's why you should care about it, and here's what you should be doing. It's a whole other animal to have faculty talk with each other about the value of it, and for some of your high-quality faculty to, in fact, be champions, because, again, we know they're out there. Not all faculty see this as bad or something we shouldn't be doing. So when you talk a little bit back to the issue of will building, identifying those people that are going to be the champions, make the case to their fellow faculty, really can smooth the road on some of these issues.
There is another question I can't resist before we move on, and it ties into, Marcus, to what you were saying, and I think Tiffany may want to add some of her thoughts on this one. But this, from a participant, I find that academic people take a dim view of CPL for former military people. Being a veteran and recent graduate, this is something that I've dealt with firsthand. Any comments on this?
Sure.
So, Tiffany, I know you've done a lot of work at your institution with aligning and mapping military credit, and Marcus, Ivy Tech's also done a lot of work in terms of the military crosswalk. So I'd be interested in hearing more about what you did to bring, how faculty came on board with that.
And it really speaks to what Nan and Marcus were talking about, providing this professional development, providing training, letting them know about CPL options, as I mentioned earlier, about the rigorous and validity of credit for prior learning. But we know that military and veterans are highly skilled and highly trained. And I'm telling you, in the training, once the faculty review and see a military transcript and your ACE credit recommendations that have the breakdown of the learning outcomes and at what level and how many credit hours, it really helps them accept. It really helps them see the skills and knowledge gained coming from our military service members, and also that they're very organized, they're very determined and motivated, and just reiterating the goal or the mission of your college student success to help students and our military and our veteran student population is really key in ensuring that success. So really, explaining and letting them see the value of awarding credit for military training and experience, and the value of the success for the military and veteran students. And so we are doing more mapping of the military training and experience to our courses and our degree programs, and the faculty are the ones who are reviewing that and evaluating that to determine, equivalent courses and course credit. And so through that process, it really helps them to be engaged and see the big picture and really recognizing that extensive experience that they bring to us.
Returning to the faculty champion point for just a moment, we were looking at our military crosswalk a couple of weeks ago. I was looking at it with a couple of assistant vice chancellors, both of whom happen to be veterans. And they were the ones who looked at it and said, boy, there's not a lot here. And when I reflect on my own training, I know that I would be eligible for more than we have here. So they went out and did a little informal research, and they did it through the ACE website, actually, and identified, I think, in a circuit course for electronics, 60 examples of it in military training that we had not accounted for in the crosswalk. So right there was a stark example of the fact that, boy, maybe the best people to be working on our military crosswalk are our faculty who are, in fact, themselves veterans, because they can attest to the quality of the training. They also know the right questions to ask based upon the training that they've had. So they sort of serve as both ideal administrators that can expand the work that's already being done by spotting the gaps. and also good ambassadors for the work, because they can sit with their fellow faculty and say, you know, I can vouch for the fact that this stuff is legit, and let me show you how I figured these things out. So now I know that finding faculty that are veterans may not be easy on every campus. That happens to be at ours because of the nature of our faculty, I think. But I'm also pretty confident that you're going to find some folks on almost every campus who have some military experience or training who could be that point person or among the committee who could undertake a process like this that would look closely at military training and its relationship to credit for prior learning.
I would like to just kind of add to that. So in addition to doing some mapping, and the type of mapping that we're doing is actually to load all of the military credits that have been evaluated into our student information system for the articulation tables. But one of the things that we have found, and I just want to point out, is that that the military has additional learning on top of what has been evaluated through the ACE evaluation. So the ACE evaluations is very extensive, but it's not 100% of all the training. And so we also have found that many of our military students have additional learning that they've acquired through their training that may not be evaluated. And so we encourage them to continue through the portfolio process to capture that additional learning.
So one of the things, I was looking at this question as you all were talking, and I think you're really speaking to this with military and others, and that's just, when you're looking at credit for prior learning, you're talking about it with each other, with faculty, other stakeholders, how do you articulate the academic foundation? We've talked about mapping to particular courses, looking at specific objectives, a course-to-course match, competencies, but it seems like to me what you're describing is beyond that. Anybody want to speak to that? What would be your elevator speech about the academic foundation of credit for prior learning?
At the risk of being boring, it's back to student learning outcomes. It's clear understanding of what a student should know and be able to do at the end of a course, and then looking at the experience, whether it be in the military or in the workforce or learning in other ways, and saying, well, they got that same kind of knowledge and understanding and ability from that work over there. We're offering it in this course over here, therefore they're equivalent. So I don't think you can undersell the importance of having those well-articulated learning outcomes as the bedrock of these kinds of conversations.
I agree with Marcus, and I want to underline something that Tiffany said earlier, is that this is a rigorous academic process. It is as rigorous as any academic program, and therefore needs to have the attention. So those learning outcomes are essential. Looking at the assessment process with those learning outcomes is a very important piece. But it also, I think, needs to really have as an institution, have a good relationship with the idea of where things fit within the curriculum. And so, you know, we talk about it as mapping, but I think there's a larger picture there in terms of thinking about when students acquire the education that they do from our degree programs, and then as they move into the workplace, we know that students need those skills to be able to function in the workplace. And a lot of those skills actually occur in the kinds of experiences that they've already had. So we are doing a stronger bridge with the academic process and employment process and bringing that much closer together by integrating the prior learning assessment, so that we are actually building the academic world even stronger. And I'm going to give an example of what I mean. What we find in our prior learning assessment, our faculty actually say advising the students is one of the best professional developments that they have, because they learn about the industry. And what we find is that many of our students are coming out of industry. They may actually have knowledge that our faculty do not have. And by bringing that into the academic process, it enhances and develops more of what we're actually able to offer to students in our classes, because the faculty have learned more and it enhances what they're developing. So there's this real, there's an academic process about it, that the integrity is a very valid integrity piece, but it also increases the academic quality of the programs at the same time.
Thanks. I think with that, we will move on to the last question and include a lot of participants' questions under this as well. At your institution, how have you balanced the policy and practice implementation?
So I'm going to start with that. And one of the challenges, as I mentioned before, has been to really ensure consistency across so many locations. And so one of the things that we did a few years ago is to stop and really analyze all of our practices and map that against our policy statements. It's been very important because it really pointed out where we weren't kind of in alignment. And we've been able to really have some very good discussions across the college and bring some of our practices in alignment so that we're our practices are really feeding out of policy. We also recently were part of one of the tax grants that came to the SUNY System because we offer the associate degree as well. And in that, there was an objective to develop policy across the system. In that, we discovered, actually had been completely lost and forgotten, that SUNY had a policy in place from 1976 that talked about credit for prior learning and some of the practices that needed to come out of it. So we were able to take that archival piece that was actually still active policy, but literally nobody remembered it. And we mapped out all of the practices that were happening across the 30 community colleges in the system. And from that, we were able to, again, kind of extract out the best practices, but also practices that we could all agree upon and develop some policy that would be, it would be, everybody could work with within the system. So we have done institutional alignment, but this the system alignment has also been very, very important because it means, again, with transfer of prior learning assessment, that we have a clear way of articulating the process and the results of the prior learning and why it can be transferred from institution to institution within the system. Marcus?
So the challenge at Ivy Tech around policy goes back to what I led with an hour ago about the institution itself, and that is consistency across our regions and our campuses. We have 14 regions. That's how the state of Indiana is sort of diced up to represent the various areas, and 75 sites where we deliver education within the state, which means prior learning assessment can sort of be construed 75 different ways depending on who you talk to, what region you're in. So the initial challenge for us around that is simply to achieve some consistency of process and approach across all those regions. It's complicated by the notion that our students often will take courses in more than one region because we're only offering something one place and not another. Then you throw in the online environment when a student who might be in the northwest part of the state is taking a course that's being delivered electronically online from somewhere in the southeast. And so, you have all of these pieces together. The student only sees Ivy Tech, and behind the scenes there are all these little pieces and parts that are not, in fact, always working in lockstep. So the beauty of policy for us is really to move us more towards that consistency. One other piece of the policy angle that I think has some real value, and there's a recent example of in Indiana, is the Indiana state legislation, put to the institutions in the state the notion that we must do a better job in accounting for military experience and credit for prior learning. So while you might find among the institutions varying appetites for engaging CPL, when you get a mandate from the legislature that says you're going to do better at this, institutions, you all of a sudden find people who otherwise would be disinterested are now all of a sudden interested in coming through with improvements or innovation. So, you know, the policy environment can help drive change and good change, and it behooves folks that are interested in prior learning to be paying attention to what's happening with your state legislatures, because they may in fact be providing opportunity for you to address improvement or increasing services or that sort of thing, so that, you know, the policy in fact can drive the practice, improve the practice, when we sometimes assume that policy is a bad word. Tiffany?
And they really both just, you know, took the words right out of my mouth, and I share the same, really ensuring your efforts with practices and policies are consistent college-wide, but also that there's an alignment through your state system in various policies. So for us, for the state of Florida, it's an articulated state, right? So our Florida colleges and our state university systems have, you know, guaranteed transferability. We also have a statewide course numbering system. And the great thing is that Florida really has some good statewide PLA policies and continues to work with institutions on credit for prior learning. So Florida colleges in the system institutions are required to use ACE credit recommendations for the evaluation of military training and experience. And we also have statewide guarantees for the award of college credit for national exams such as CLEP, DSST, and AP based on certain scores earned. And we also have articulated credit for earned industry certification. So all of that helps drive institutional policy and practice, but it also is kind of evolving because the institutions can then inform policy and really work on expanding CPL system-wide and statewide. And, of course, we should all be familiar and stay current and informed with really the great work that ACE, that CALE, that Lumina, and even our fellow institutions are engaged in related to CPL, so that we are really staying in tune with the research and really the best practices nationally, which can help to balance your practices and your policy related to CPL.
So you both talked a lot about how state policy can drive CPL practice at the institutional level, and I'm wondering, we've had several questions about financial aid, and I'll just use one as an example so you can talk about maybe some things that you see that are changing that could help, or things that are still getting in the way. From one participant, the question is, how does CPL affect federal financial aid if they have multiple credits? So what are you all seeing in terms of trying to work with CPL and financial aid and some of the barriers or challenges that remain?
You know, I'm seeing an increased appetite for, you know, a more widespread interpretation of what financial aid can support, which is good news for CPL work. I think people are beginning to understand the important role that it can play as we have this national completion agenda, right, where everybody's talking about completion from the foundations to the president to some of the leadership groups. Everybody's focused on how can we get more credentials for students. They see that CPL is, in fact, one of those ways, and therefore we have to think about how we can incentivize students to use it. And therefore, you know, financial aid money needs to be freed up as an opportunity. So I'm sort of enthusiastic about the path that we are headed on right now in terms of that work. Now, you know, that's kind of on the national landscape. I still feel like at the institutional level there's not strong an appetite for folks who obviously, as they're doling out financial aid, are trying to find the most effective and efficient ways to do that. And because, again, back to the will issue, they're not necessarily seeing the demand for credit for prior learning. And frankly, who could blame them? They're in the financial aid office. They're not dealing with the issues in the ways that folks that are on this call, or certainly our panelists, are dealing with it. So they're not seeing the demand. They need to be helped to understand that they need to think more freely about how we apply financial aid so that students can really take best advantage of the prior learning options that we lay out in front of them that might have some costs associated with them.
So in terms of financial aid, I see that as one of the offices that should be included in the institutional discussions around prior learning assessment. They're a very valuable support office in the process. The way that we handle the cost of financial aid, of credit for prior learning, is as a fee, and it's a scale depending on how many credits the students are asking for. And again, it's the portfolio, because all other forms are not being, we don't have a fee for bringing in any other of the other types of credits, and there's no transcription fee either. So the only thing that the student is paying for is the portfolio fee if they go in a portfolio basis. We have defined it as part of the cost of attendance. And so actually the fee for doing prior learning assessment is covered in financial aid as the cost of attendance, because that is part of attending our institution as one of the options for the students. And because it's a fee, it can go under that bit. So our students actually don't have difficulty paying for the prior learning assessment for the portfolio fee.
Tiffany, anything to add?
Sure. So, and this is kind of general and nationwide as it relates to financial aid for CPL. Historically and typically, it is not covered. Many forms are not covered through financial aid, which is why CPL options tend to be less expensive or more cost efficient, if you will, than taking the actual course for that reason. But one of the great things is Marcus mentioned is that, the U.S. Department of Education is really looking at financial aid, federal financial aid funding for CPL options. And, many of you may have heard of the Experimental Sites Initiative, where they're really working with institutions and experimenting the award of Title IV funds for various CPL methods, such as portfolios and credit by exams, and even some competency-based programs. So I think, as Marcus said, on a national level, through that experiment, we're really hoping to inform policy, federal financial aid policy, to be able to include that more for CPL. And then institutionally, we are, working towards that. We'll be participating in the experiments, but what we're doing is really keeping the costs and fees for our CPL options, I guess, doable or less costly than actually taking the course, so that students are able to take advantage of the CPL options and be able to afford those options as well.
Great. One more question before we begin to wrap up. In looking at this balance of policy and practice implementation, how have you used technology? What have you used in terms of technology to help advance your CPL programs and services?
That's a great question. Speaking for Ivy Tech, the answer is we don't, but we should be. I have just started looking recently at what's going on in Pennsylvania, Pennsylvania has banded together all of their state institutions, I think the two-year institutions, under a single CPL or PLA banner, so they have a system that spans all of those institutions that students can log on to and go through the CPL process, again, particularly focused on portfolios. I love it. It would be an ideal answer for Indiana. I think we're a long way away from it, primarily from a resource standpoint. But, you know, the bottom line is that what technology does at its best for work like this is simplify and cut down on time on task for the faculty. So, you know, when you have a place that becomes a repository, a common place that all faculty can go to and apply a rubric to a portfolio, give students feedback, transact the work of CPL, you have a time saver. You knock down a barrier that makes faculty less disinclined to do the work because they know it's not going to be so time-consuming and painful. So to me, technology is an important part of the process. Now, you know, that has to come after you build will, after you come to understanding of what the process should look like and all those kinds of things. But it can really serve, I think, a lot more folks to interface with it and use a CPL process if you have good technology underlying it.
So technology has been, for us, one of the places that we have put a lot of thinking into and some development. We have developed a few years ago, actually now about 8 years ago, our own homegrown system to manage the portfolio process. It's called PLA Planner. And it is a place where students, it's really a management tool, so the students submit their portfolio in the system. They can work with their faculty advisor in there. It gets assigned to an evaluator. The whole evaluation process is there, and then we manage the outcome so that we can put it on the student record. It's in a system that is it's in an IBM note system, which no longer is supported, and so as an institution we're having to rethink it and redesign it. In the meantime, as part of our Illumina grant with developing the Global Learning Qualification Framework, we have been experimenting using different e-portfolio systems. We've actually played with 3 different systems where we have developed the templates for students to develop a portfolio and looking at the assessment side of it. So we are hoping to continue developing some more possibilities with the concept of e-portfolios and our management system and trying to bring those together. I'm in the middle of writing a grant right now that I'm hoping will take us in that direction and actually have something that's open source for people. The other project that we've been working on is trying to really figure out how, regardless of what kind of student information system anyone has, because we're in the middle of also changing ours, is how to really bring in good articulation tables that we can then use in the system. So we are in the middle of building tables that will be all of the CLEP, all of standardized exams, all of what ACE has evaluated, both military and corporate side, all of what the National College Credit Recommendation Service has done. One thing we've not talked about is, I know Tiffany does and we do evaluate our own, where we go out and evaluate training for our students. And so we have quite an extensive amount of those. So it's everything that we accept into the college that is not our portfolio.